Do you know that American race-based slavery was not the original system in Virginia? Do you know that in the early 1600s, both African and European workers arrived as indentured servants, serving fixed terms, then gaining their freedom? Do you know that the man whose court case helped destroy that freedom pathway for black people was himself a formerly enslaved African from Angola, a man who had used that same pathway to become a free landowner? His name was Anthony Johnson, and the case he brought to court in 1654 helped build the legal architecture that would enslave millions. But the story begins even earlier, in 1640, with three men who ran away together. Same crime, same master, same court, radically different sentences. To understand how American slavery became a race-based, lifetime institution, we need to understand these two court cases and the devastating irony at the heart of one of them. To understand how this happened, we have to look at the Virginia of the 1620s. It was not the plantation society of the American South we picture today. It was a desperate, disease-ridden outpost clinging to the edge of a continent. Labor was the colony's most precious commodity, and that labor was supplied almost entirely by indentured servitude. Desperate people from the slums of London would sign away 4 to 7 years of their lives. In exchange for passage across the Atlantic, they worked the tobacco fields. If they survived their indenture, and many did not, they were given their freedom. They received a small plot of land, some corn, and the legal status of free colonists. And crucially, in those early decades, this system applied to Africans as well. Around 1621, a ship arrived in Virginia carrying a man recorded simply as Antonio, a Negro. He was likely captured in the Portuguese colony of Angola. But when he stepped off the ship in Virginia, he was not legally a slave for life. The English had no laws establishing hereditary slavery in the colony at this time. Antonio was purchased by a wealthy planter named Edward Bennett. He was sent to work on Bennett's massive tobacco plantation in Warraskioke. There, he toiled alongside white indentured servants from England and Ireland. They shared the same grueling labor, the same meager rations, and the same brutal overseers. But they also shared the same legal path to eventual freedom. Antonio's survival was a statistical miracle. The mortality rate in early Virginia was catastrophic due to malaria, dysentery, and starvation. But the greatest threat came on the morning of March 22, 1622. The Powhatan Confederacy launched a coordinated surprise assault on the English settlements. In a single day, they killed 347 colonists, nearly a third of the English population. The Bennett plantation was hit exceptionally hard. Warriors swept through the fields and the main house, wiping out almost everyone. When the smoke cleared, only 5 people on the plantation were left alive. Antonio was one of them. His survival in the massacre marked him as incredibly resilient, a trait that did not go unnoticed by his masters. Sometime in the 1630s or 1640s, Antonio completed his term of indenture. He was now a free man. He anglicized his name to Anthony Johnson. He married Mary, another African-born survivor of the indentured system. Together, they moved to Northampton County on Virginia's eastern shore to build a life. By 1651, Anthony Johnson achieved something remarkable. He became a landowner. Through the colony's headright system, a colonist received 50 acres of land for every person they imported to Virginia. Johnson claimed headrights for 5 people, including his own children. He was granted 250 acres of prime Virginia real estate. By the early 1650s, Anthony Johnson was a wealthy black planter with his own indentured servants, both black and white. He traded cattle, sued in court, and participated fully in the economic life of the colony. But the system that built Johnson's wealth was about to be tested. One of Johnson's laborers was a black man named John Casor. Casor claimed that he had come to Virginia as an indentured servant. Furthermore, he argued that his contract had expired years earlier. Casor claimed he was being held illegally beyond his term. 2 neighboring white planters, Robert and George Parker, heard Casor's plea. They believed him, and they offered to take Casor in as a free laborer on their own land. The Parkers pressured Johnson to let the man go. For a moment, Anthony Johnson wavered, telling his family he might release Casor. But his wife Mary and his son Richard were furious. His family argued fiercely that Casor belonged to them permanently. They convinced Anthony Johnson to fight for his property. So Johnson walked into the Northampton County Court. He filed a civil lawsuit against his white neighbour, Robert Parker. Johnson's argument was shocking in its implications. He did not argue that Casor's indenture contract was still active. He argued that John Casor was never an indentured servant at all. Johnson claimed that Casor was his Negro for life. He was asking a court of law to recognize a status that did not formally exist in Virginia statutes. He was asking the court to invent legal lifetime slavery. The white judges of the Northampton County Court listened to the arguments. On March 8, 1654, they delivered their verdict. They ruled entirely in favor of Anthony Johnson. The court ordered that Robert Parker must return John Casor immediately. More devastatingly, the court decreed that Casor was Johnson's property for the duration of his natural life. This was a watershed moment in American legal history. It was the first time a colonial court civilly ruled that a person could be enslaved for life simply based on their status, not as a punishment for a crime, not as a prisoner of war. John Casor became by legal decree a slave. The tragic irony of the Casor case is almost too much to bear. Anthony Johnson had arrived in Virginia in chains, just like John Casor. The system of indentured servitude had given Johnson his freedom. That freedom allowed him to acquire land, build wealth, and gain legal standing. And how did he use that legal standing? He used it to go to court and violently close the door behind him. He argued that the very pathway that saved him should be denied to another black man. Anthony Johnson was not a cartoon villain. He was a rational actor protecting his wealth in a ruthless society. But in doing so, he helped the colonial legal system crystallize a monstrous concept. The concept that black Africans could be held as property forever. If this history matters to you, please take 5 seconds to like this video and subscribe to Unshackled History. Leave a comment below letting us know your thoughts and share this story with others. But the Casor case did not happen in a vacuum. The foundation for race-based slavery had been laid 14 years earlier in a criminal court. It was July 9, 1640 in the Virginia General Court. 3 indentured servants were brought before the judges in shackles. They had run away from their master, Hugh Gwynn, and fled to Maryland before being captured. The court records name them carefully. Victor, described as a Dutchman, James Gregory, described as a Scotchman, and John Punch, described as a Negro. They had committed the exact same crime. They worked for the exact same master. And they stood before the exact same judge. The judge handed down the sentences. For Victor and James Gregory, the punishment was harsh but standard. They were each ordered to receive 30 lashes. Their indenture contracts were extended by 4 years. But when the judge turned to John Punch, the law suddenly changed. Punch was also sentenced to 30 lashes. But his sentence did not include a 4-year extension. Instead, the court ordered him to serve his said master or his assigns for the time of his natural life. This is the first documented case in Virginia where race was explicitly used to justify a different legal punishment. John Punch was condemned to slavery not because he ran away, but because he was an African who ran away. Some historians even argue that the white descendants of John Punch eventually led to the maternal line of Barack Obama. Whether true or not, Punch's sentence was the match that lit the fire. Between John Punch in 1640 and Anthony Johnson in 1654, the legal theory of slavery was born. But the Virginia elite soon realized they needed a comprehensive system. In 1662, the colony passed a law known as Partus Sequitur Ventrum. It declared that the condition of a child followed the condition of the mother. If your mother was enslaved, you were born a slave, regardless of who your father was. This closed the loophole that allowed mixed-race children to claim freedom through their white fathers. In 1667, the government declared that Christian baptism could no longer free an enslaved person. In 1670, they made it illegal for free black men to own white indentured servants. Finally, in 1705, Virginia passed the Comprehensive Slave Code. It officially legally defined all non-Christian servants brought to the colony as slaves for life. The transition from indentured servitude to hereditary race-based slavery took exactly 65 years. And what became of Anthony Johnson? Around 1665, sensing the shifting racial winds in Virginia, he moved his family to Maryland. He leased 300 acres in Somerset County and named his new estate Tonis Vineyard. He died there around 1670, a wealthy and successful man. But the legal machine he had helped to build was not finished with him. After his death, a white judge in Virginia reviewed the status of his 250-acre estate back in Northampton County. The court ruled that the land could be seized by the state. The justification was chilling. The court declared that because Anthony Johnson was a Negro, and by consequence an alien, he was never legally entitled to own land. The 250 acres were stripped from his descendants and handed over to a white colonist. The system had rewritten history to erase his legitimacy. The story of Anthony Johnson and John Punch is the story of a trap slowly closing. John Punch was crushed by the raw, punitive power of the state. Anthony Johnson believed he could outsmart the state by joining it. He used the courts to enslave John Casor, believing his wealth would protect him from his race. But a system built on racial supremacy has no loyalty. The very legal precedents Johnson helped establish were eventually turned against his own children. It is a brutal reminder that when you help build a cage for your neighbor, you may eventually find yourself locked inside. The history of slavery is a vast, global human tragedy, and most of it has never been properly told. If this video opened your eyes, please like, subscribe, and leave your thoughts in the comments below. Click the next video on your screen to keep uncovering the history that was hidden from you.